The dust settled on the poker table like a death shroud, and Rebecca Ashford knew her life had just changed forever. When she saw the deed to her father's ranch lying face up among the cards, her brothers had thrown down in their final, desperate bet. She stood in the doorway of the Silver Spur Saloon in Clifton, Arizona, her heart pounding so hard she could barely hear the raucous laughter echoing off the wooden walls. It was June of 1883, and the desert heat made the air shimmer like water, but the chill running down her spine had nothing to do with temperature. Her father had been dead only 3 months, and already Thomas and William had squandered everything he had spent 30 years building. The ranch, all 800 acres of it, now belonged to a man she had never met, a railroad speculator from back east who collected land the way other men collected playing cards. "Rebecca, you should not be here." Her eldest brother Thomas staggered toward her, his face flushed with whiskey and shame. At 28, he looked 10 years older, his eyes bloodshot and his hands trembling. "Go home. Home." Her voice cracked like a whip through the suddenly quiet saloon. Every man in the room turned to look at her, and she felt their stares like brands on her skin. At 22 years old, she had never set foot in a saloon before, but propriety seemed like a small concern when you had just lost everything. "What home, Thomas? You just gambled it away." Every acre Papa worked for, every fence post he drove into the ground with his own hands, every water right he fought the mining companies for. Gone, because you and William could not stay away from a card table. William, younger at 25 but no less foolish, would not even meet her eyes. He stood behind Thomas, swaying slightly, one hand braced against the bar for support. The sight of him made her stomach turn. These were her brothers, her only living family, and they had betrayed her father's memory in the most callous way imaginable. "We will get it back," Thomas said, but there was no conviction in his voice. "We just need another stake, another game, no." The word came from a man sitting at a corner table, his voice low and steady as a river stone. Rebecca's eyes snapped to him, and for the first time she noticed the stranger who had been watching the entire scene unfold. He wore dusty riding clothes and a wide-brimmed hat pushed back on his head, revealing dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything without judgment. "You boys have done enough damage for one night. Maybe it is time you listened to your sister." "This is not your concern, mister," Thomas said, puffing up his chest in a pathetic attempt at intimidation. The stranger stood slowly, and Rebecca saw that he was tall, well over 6 feet, with the lean, hard build of a man who spent his days in the saddle. There was a Colt revolver on his hip, worn with the easy familiarity of someone who knew how to use it, but his hand never went near it. He did not need to threaten. His presence alone was enough to make Thomas step back. "Name is Parker Hastings," he said, tipping his hat slightly in Rebecca's direction. "And I reckon it became my concern when I watched 2 grown men throw away their sister's future without a second thought. That kind of thing does not sit right with me." Rebecca felt something shift in her chest, a strange flutter that had nothing to do with her anger or fear. Parker Hastings looked at her with an expression she could not quite read, something between sympathy and respect, as if he saw her as a person rather than just a woman to be pitied or protected. It was a look she had rarely received in her life. "Can it be undone?" she asked, forcing herself to focus on what mattered. "The deed, the transfer, is there any legal way to reverse it?" Parker's expression grew grim. "Not legally, no. Once a deed changes hands in a fair game, the law considers it binding, but that does not mean there are not other ways." "What other ways?" Hope flared in her chest, bright and painful. "The man who won your land, this Clarence Morton from Philadelphia, he is not a rancher. He is a speculator. Men like that, they only want land they can turn into profit quickly. If someone were to make him a better offer, or challenge him for it in another game, he might be willing to deal. "We do not have money for a better offer," Rebecca said bitterly. "My father left us the ranch and enough operating capital to keep it running for a year, maybe two." Thomas and William gambled away the capital along with the deed. Parker was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes studying her face. She felt exposed under that gaze, as if he could see straight through to all her fears and desperate hopes. Finally, he spoke. "I might have a proposition for you, Miss Ashford, but not here, not now. Come find me tomorrow at the boarding house on Main Street. We will talk about options." Before she could respond, he picked up his hat, settled it on his head, and walked out of the saloon without looking back. The room erupted in conversation the moment he was gone, a dozen voices speculating about who he was and what he wanted. Rebecca ignored them all. She turned to her brothers, and the fury in her face made them both flinch. "You will come home now," she said quietly. "And tomorrow you will start packing. I want you both off the property by the end of the week." "Rebecca, you cannot mean that," William said, finally finding his voice. "We are family." "Family does not destroy each other," she replied. "Papa trusted you. He left the ranch to all three of us, equal shares, because he believed we would work together to keep it going. You betrayed that trust. You betrayed me. I cannot forgive that, not now, maybe not ever." She walked out of the saloon with her head high, though inside she felt like she was crumbling into dust. The night air was cool after the stifling heat of the day, and the stars overhead looked impossibly bright and distant. Clifton was a small mining town nestled in a valley surrounded by mountains, and on a clear night like this, it felt like you could reach up and touch the sky. But Rebecca had never felt more earthbound, more trapped by circumstances beyond her control. The ride back to the ranch took an hour, and she spent every minute of it trying to figure out what Parker Hastings could possibly want from her. Men did not offer help without expecting something in return. She knew that much. Her father had taught her to be wary of strangers bearing gifts. But there had been something in Parker's eyes, something honest and straightforward, that made her want to trust him. Or maybe that was just desperation talking. The ranch house looked dark and empty when she arrived. Her brothers had ridden off in the opposite direction, probably to find another bottle and drown their guilt. Rebecca unsaddled her horse, a gentle mare named Daisy, and made sure she had water and feed before heading inside. The house felt too big and too quiet without her father. Every room held memories of him. The parlor where he used to read in the evenings, the kitchen where he made his terrible coffee every morning, the porch where he would sit and watch the sunset after a long day's work. She sat down at his old desk and pulled out the ledgers, forcing herself to look at the numbers even though she already knew they would be bad. Her father had taught her bookkeeping, insisting that she needed to understand the business side of ranching just as much as her brothers. It was one of the many ways he had treated her as an equal, never suggesting that her gender made her less capable. Looking at the ledgers now, she saw exactly how much Thomas and William had stolen. They had taken nearly all the operating capital, $1,500 that was supposed to last them through the next year. Without it, she could not pay the ranch hands, could not buy supplies, could not maintain the property even if she somehow got it back. She put her head in her hands and let herself cry, just for a moment. Then she dried her eyes, closed the ledgers, and went to bed. Tomorrow she would talk to Parker Hastings and find out what he wanted. Tomorrow she would start figuring out how to save what was left of her life. Morning came too quickly. Rebecca woke with the sun, as she always did, and went through her usual routine of feeding the chickens and milking the cow. There were only 2 ranch hands left now, old Henry, who had worked for her father since the beginning, and his son James. They lived in the bunkhouse and took care of the cattle and horses. When she walked down to tell them what had happened, their faces went pale with shock. "Those damned fools," Henry said, his weathered face twisting with anger. "Pardon my language, Miss Rebecca, but that is the most selfish, stupid thing I have ever heard. Your papa must be turning in his grave." "I am going to get it back," Rebecca said, with more confidence than she felt. "I met someone last night who might be able to help. I am going into town to talk to him this morning." James, who was only a few years older than Rebecca at 25, frowned with concern. "You should not be trusting strangers, Miss Rebecca. There are a lot of men who would take advantage of a woman in your situation." "I know," she said. "But what choice do I have? I cannot just give up." She rode into Clifton an hour later, the morning sun already beating down with relentless intensity. The town was busy with activity. Miners heading to the copper mines that dotted the mountains, freight wagons rolling through on their way to bigger cities. The boarding house on Main Street was a two-story building with a wide porch, painted white but already graying with dust. Rebecca tied Daisy to the hitching post and went inside, her heart hammering in her chest. The proprietor, a thin woman with sharp eyes, looked her up and down. "Help you? I am looking for Parker Hastings. Room 6, upstairs." "Though I am not sure it is proper for a young lady to be visiting a gentleman's room unchaperoned." Rebecca felt her cheeks burn, but she kept her voice steady. "Could you send someone to ask him to come down, then?" The woman sniffed, but sent her son upstairs with the message. A few minutes later, Parker Hastings came down the stairs, looking more presentable than he had the night before. He wore clean clothes and had obviously shaved, and in the daylight Rebecca could see that he was younger than she had first thought, probably around 30. He had a strong, honest face with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. "Miss Ashford," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "I am glad you came. Shall we take a walk? I think this conversation might be better suited to privacy." They walked together through the streets of Clifton, heading toward the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open desert. Rebecca was acutely aware of the curious looks they received, of the whispers that would no doubt follow. In a town this small, everyone knew everyone's business, and by evening the whole town would be speculating about her and this stranger. But she could not afford to care about gossip right now. When they were far enough from prying ears, Parker stopped and turned to face her. "I am going to be straight with you, Miss Ashford, because I think you deserve honesty. I am a gambler by trade, but not the kind your brothers are. I do not play unless I know I can win, and I never bet more than I can afford to lose. I have been making my way through the territory for the past few years, playing cards and saving money, and I have done well enough that I have a substantial stake set aside." "Why are you telling me this?" Rebecca asked, though her heart was starting to beat faster. "Because I want to help you win back your ranch. I will stake the money for a game with Clarence Morton, and I will play on your behalf. If we win, the deed comes back to you, free and clear. If we lose, well, I will be out the money, but you will be no worse off than you are now." Rebecca stared at him, trying to understand. "Why would you do that? What do you get out of it?" Parker looked uncomfortable for the first time since she had met him. He took off his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture that made him look younger and more vulnerable. "The truth. I am tired of drifting. I have been moving from town to town for years now, never staying long enough to put down roots. I want land. I want a place to build something permanent. Your ranch, it is exactly the kind of place I have been dreaming about. So here is my proposal. I will help you win back the deed, and in return you will sell me a portion of the land. Say, 200 acres. That will leave you with 600 acres, more than enough to run a profitable operation, and I will have enough to start my own small ranch." Rebecca felt dizzy with relief and suspicion all tangled together. "That is all you want, just land?" "That is all," he said, meeting her eyes steadily. "I know it is a lot to ask you to trust a stranger, but I give you my word as a man of honor that I will not cheat you or take advantage. We will draw up a legal contract before the game, specifying the terms. If I win back your land, you will sell me 200 acres at a fair market price, payable over 5 years so you are not strapped for cash. If I lose, the contract is void and you owe me nothing." It was almost too good to be true, and Rebecca's father had always taught her that things that seemed too good to be true usually were. But what other option did she have? She could not win back the ranch on her own, and she certainly could not trust her brothers to help. At least Parker Hastings was being straightforward about what he wanted, and if he truly was as good a gambler as he claimed, maybe they actually had a chance. "All right," she said slowly, "but I have conditions of my own. First, I want to be there during the game. I want to see everything that happens. Second, we draw up the contract with a lawyer present before anything else happens. And third, if you do get those 200 acres, they will be on the eastern section, away from the best water sources. I need those for the cattle." Parker's face split into a grin, the first real smile she had seen from him, and it transformed his whole appearance. He looked warm and approachable, the kind of man you could trust with your life. "You drive a hard bargain, Miss Ashford, but I accept your terms. Shall we go find a lawyer?" They spent the rest of the morning with Horace Baker, the town's only lawyer, drawing up a contract that specified every detail of their agreement. Horace was a fussy man with wire-rimmed spectacles, but he was thorough, and Rebecca appreciated that. When the contract was finally complete and signed by both parties, with Horace as witness, she felt a small measure of relief. At least now she had some legal protection, even if everything else went wrong. The next step was to arrange a meeting with Clarence Morton. Parker went to the hotel where the speculator was staying, while Rebecca waited at the lawyer's office, too nervous to sit still. It felt like hours before Parker returned, though it could not have been more than 30 minutes. "He agreed," Parker said, his expression grim but determined. "Tomorrow night at the Silver Spur. 5-card draw, best of 5 hands. The stakes are the ranch deed against $2,000 cash." Rebecca felt her stomach drop. $2,000. "You have that much." "I have it," Parker said. "Barely. But I would not agree to this if I did not think I could win. Morton is arrogant, and arrogant men make mistakes. I have played against his type before. What if you are wrong?" Rebecca could not stop herself from asking, "What if he is better than you think?" Parker's expression softened, and he reached out to touch her shoulder, a brief gesture of comfort. "Then I will lose $2,000, and you will have to find another way. But I do not intend to lose, Miss Ashford. I promise you that." The rest of the day passed in a blur of anxiety and preparation. Rebecca went back to the ranch and told Henry and James what was happening. They were skeptical of Parker's motives, but they could see she had made up her mind. That evening, she sat on the porch and watched the sun set over the mountains, trying to memorize every detail of the land she might lose forever. The way the light turned the rocks golden and red, the sound of the wind through the mesquite trees, the distant lowing of cattle settling down for the night. This was her home, her birthright, and she would fight for it with everything she had. The next day dragged on forever. Rebecca tried to keep herself busy with chores, but her mind kept wandering to the game that would happen that evening. She changed her dress 3 times, wanting to look respectable but not too fancy, settled but not desperate. Finally, as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, She saddled Daisy and rode back into town. The Silver Spur was crowded when she arrived. Word had spread about the game, as she knew it would, and it seemed like half the town had turned out to watch. Rebecca pushed her way through the crowd, ignoring the stares and whispers, until she found Parker sitting at the same corner table where she had first seen him. He looked calm and focused, his cards laid out in front of him as he practiced shuffling. When he saw her, he stood and gestured to a chair beside him. "You came," he said, and there was relief in his voice. "I told you I would," Rebecca said. "I need to see this through." Clarence Morton arrived a few minutes later, and Rebecca felt her hatred solidify into something cold and hard in her chest. He was a portly man in his 50s with thinning hair and expensive clothes, the kind of man who looked at everything and everyone as if calculating their worth in dollars and cents. He barely glanced at Rebecca, dismissing her as unimportant, and that casual disregard made her furious. "Shall we begin?" Morton said, settling himself at the table with the air of a man who had already won. "I assume you have the cash." Parker pulled out a leather pouch and counted out $2,000 in neat stacks on the table. The sight of that much money made the crowd murmur with excitement. Morton produced the deed to the Ashford ranch, laying it beside the cash like it was just another piece of paper. The game began, and Rebecca found herself barely able to breathe as she watched. Parker played with a quiet confidence that was almost hypnotic, his face revealing nothing as he studied his cards and made his bets. Morton was flashier, more talkative, frequently making jokes and trying to unsettle his opponent. But Parker never took the bait, never let himself be distracted. The first hand went to Morton, and Rebecca felt her heart sink. The second hand went to Parker, and hope flared again. The third hand was a draw, with both men folding after the initial bets. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife, and Rebecca could feel sweat trickling down her back despite the cool evening air. The fourth hand was where everything changed. Parker won with a full house, kings over eights, and Morton's expression finally cracked, revealing frustration beneath the polished exterior. The fifth hand would decide everything. Winner takes all. Rebecca watched Parker's face as he picked up his cards, and for just a moment she saw a flicker of emotion in his eyes. Satisfaction, maybe, or relief. He kept his cards close to his chest, discarded two, and drew two more. Morton did the same, his hands trembling slightly as he rearranged his hand. The betting went back and forth, each man raising the other until Morton finally called. "Let us see what you have, Cowboy." Parker laid down his cards one by one, a straight flush, 6 through 10 of hearts. The crowd erupted in cheers and groans, depending on who they had been rooting for. Morton stared at the cards in disbelief, then at his own hand, which held only 3 of a kind. He had lost. Rebecca felt tears streaming down her face before she even realized she was crying. The deed was hers again. The ranch was hers again. Parker stood and shook Morton's hand with professional courtesy, then scooped up the deed and turned to her. "I believe this belongs to you," he said, holding it out. She took it with shaking hands, clutching it to her chest like it was the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you so much." "We are not done yet," Parker said gently. "We still have business to complete. But for tonight, let us just celebrate the fact that your home is yours again." The crowd in the saloon bought them drinks, dozens of them, and Rebecca found herself laughing and crying at the same time as people she barely knew congratulated her and slapped Parker on the back. Morton left quickly, his face red with embarrassment and anger, and Rebecca could not find it in herself to feel sorry for him. He had bought stolen property, whether he knew it or not, and he had gotten exactly what he deserved. Later, Much later, after the celebrations had died down and the saloon had emptied, Parker walked Rebecca out to where Daisy was tied. The night was cool and clear, and the stars overhead looked close enough to touch. "I meant what I said," Parker told her. "We have a contract, and I will hold up my end of it, but there is no rush. Take some time to settle things with your brothers to get the ranch running smoothly again. When you are ready, we will work out the details of the land sale." Rebecca looked up at him, this stranger who had saved her life and asked for so little in return. In the moonlight, his face looked softer, more approachable, and she found herself wondering about him. Where he came from, what had made him into a wandering gambler, what his dreams really were. "Why did you really help me?" she asked. "You could have bought land anywhere from anyone. Why risk so much for someone you did not even know?" Parker was quiet for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face. "I watched your brothers throw away something precious, something they should have protected with their lives. And I watched you walk into that saloon with your head held high, ready to fight for what was yours. That took courage. That took strength. I guess I wanted to be part of something good for once, instead of just drifting from one card game to the next. Does that make sense?" "Yes," Rebecca said softly. "It does." He helped her mount Daisy, his hands steady and warm when they touched hers. "Get home safe, Miss Ashford. I will come by the ranch in a few days, and we can talk about the future." Rebecca rode home with the deed tucked safely in her saddlebag, her heart feeling lighter than it had in months. The future was uncertain, but for the first time since her father's death, she felt like she had some control over it. And she could not stop thinking about Parker Hastings, about the way he had looked at her with respect and kindness, about the sound of his voice when he said her name. The next morning she woke to find her brothers waiting on the porch. They looked terrible, hungover and ashamed, and they would not meet her eyes. "We heard what happened," Thomas said quietly. "We heard you got the ranch back." "No thanks to you," Rebecca said coldly. "We are sorry," William said, and there were tears in his eyes. "We are so sorry, Rebecca. We know we do not deserve your forgiveness, but we are sorry." Rebecca looked at them, these men who had been her playmates as children, who had taught her to ride and rope and all the other skills she needed to survive in this harsh land. Part of her wanted to forgive them, to let them back into her life and her home. But another part of her, the part that sounded like her father, knew that forgiveness without consequences was meaningless. "You can stay," she said finally, "but not as owners. You will work as ranch hands under my direction. You will earn your keep like everyone else, and every penny you make will go toward repaying me for the money you stole. It will take years, maybe decades, but you will repay every cent. Those are my terms. Take them or leave them." Thomas and William looked at each other, then back at her. "We will take them," Thomas said. "Thank you, Rebecca. We will work hard, I promise." "You should thank Parker Hastings, not me," Rebecca said. "He is the one who won back the ranch, and you will be respectful to him when he comes to visit. He earned a portion of this land, and he will be our neighbor soon enough." Her brothers nodded, and Rebecca felt some of the anger in her chest start to ease. They would never be the same, the three of them. Too much had been broken, too much trust had been shattered. But maybe, over time, they could build something new. Something different, but still family. Parker came to the ranch 3 days later, riding a beautiful bay gelding and leading a pack mule loaded with supplies. Rebecca was in the horse corral working with a young mare when she saw him coming up the road, and her heart did a strange little flip in her chest. She told herself it was just gratitude, just relief at seeing the man who had saved her home. But deep down, she knew it was something more. "Miss Ashford," Parker said, touching his hat as he reined in his horse, "I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all," Rebecca said, wiping her dusty hands on her skirt. "I have been expecting you. Would you like some coffee? I am afraid my hospitality is not what it could be, but I can offer you that much. They sat on the porch and drank bitter coffee while they talked about the land. Parker had brought a surveyor's map of the property, and they spent over an hour marking out the 200 acres he would take. Rebecca had been prepared to argue every detail, to fight for every water source and pasture, but Parker made it easy. He asked for the eastern section, just as she had suggested, and he seemed genuinely concerned about making sure she kept the best grazing land for her cattle. "You are being very reasonable," Rebecca said, unable to hide her surprise. Parker smiled that warm, transformative smile of his. "I told you I am not trying to cheat you. I just want a place to build something. A home. Maybe a family someday." Something in the way he said family made Rebecca's cheeks flush. She looked down at her coffee cup, suddenly flustered. "Do you have family? People waiting for you somewhere?" "Not anymore," Parker said, his voice going quiet and sad. "My parents died when I was young, and I was raised by my uncle. He taught me to play cards and to always keep moving, never stay in one place long enough for trouble to find you. But he passed away 5 years ago, and I have been on my own since then. It gets lonely, living out of a saddle bag and sleeping in different boarding houses every night. I want more than that now. I want roots." Rebecca looked up at him, at the honesty in his face, and felt something shift in her heart. This man was not just a skilled gambler who had helped her win back her ranch. He was someone like her, someone who had lost people he loved and was trying to build a new life from the pieces. Someone who understood what it meant to fight for what mattered. "I think you will make a good neighbor," she said softly. "And I look forward to seeing what you build on your land." Parker's eyes met hers, and the look that passed between them was charged with something electric, something that made her breath catch in her throat. "I look forward to it too, Miss Ashford. Very much." Over the following weeks, Parker became a regular presence at the Ashford ranch. He hired a crew to start building a house on his new property, and he frequently stopped by to consult with Rebecca about water rights and grazing schedules, and all the other details that went into managing a successful ranch. Her brothers were wary of him at first, but Parker won them over with his steady competence and his refusal to hold grudges. He treated them like any other ranch hand, expecting hard work but offering respect in return. Rebecca found herself looking forward to Parker's visits more than she wanted to admit. He made her laugh with stories about his travels, and he listened when she talked about her dreams for the ranch. He never treated her like she was less capable because she was a woman, never suggested that she needed a man to run things for her. Instead, he asked her advice about his own property, trusting her expertise and experience. One afternoon in late July, when the heat was so intense it felt like the air was on fire, Parker rode up to the house looking troubled. Rebecca was in the kitchen making bread, and she wiped flour from her hands as she went out to meet him. "What is wrong?" she asked, seeing the tension in his face. "There is a man in town asking questions about the ranch," Parker said. "About how you got the deed back. He is claiming that the card game was rigged, that I cheated Morton out of the property." Rebecca felt ice slide down her spine despite the heat. "Who is making these claims?" "A lawyer from Philadelphia working for Morton. He is threatening to take the case to a judge to have the game declared invalid and the deed returned to Morton." "But you did not cheat," Rebecca said fiercely. "I was there. I watched every moment of that game. It was fair and square." "I know that, and you know that, but proving it in court might be difficult. Morton is rich and connected, and we are just a couple of ranchers in a small Arizona town. If he can find a judge who will listen to him, we could lose everything all over again." Rebecca felt panic rising in her throat, but she forced it down. She had not fought this hard to get her home back only to lose it again to a rich man's lies. "What can we do?" Parker was quiet for a moment, thinking. "We need witnesses. People who were there, who saw the game and can testify that it was honest. We need to build a case before this lawyer can get to a judge." They spent the rest of the day riding into town and talking to everyone who had been at the Silver Spur that night. Most people were willing to testify on their behalf, but a few were reluctant, afraid of crossing a powerful man like Morton. By the time the sun set, Rebecca was exhausted and frustrated, but Parker remained calm and focused. "We will figure this out," he promised her as they stood outside the boarding house. "I will not let him take your home away again." "It is not just my home anymore," Rebecca said, looking up at him. "It is yours too. We are in this together." Something in Parker's expression changed, softened, and he reached out to brush a strand of hair away from her face. His fingers were gentle against her skin, and Rebecca felt her breath catch. They were standing close, so close she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Rebecca," he said softly, using her first name for the first time, "I need to tell you something. These past few weeks, getting to know you, working beside you, I have come to care about you. More than I should, probably. More than is appropriate for business partners. I know this is not the right time, with everything that is happening, but I cannot keep pretending that I see you as just a neighbor or a friend. You mean more to me than that." Rebecca's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst out of her chest. She had been feeling the same way, the same growing affection and attraction, but she had been too afraid to name it. Hearing Parker say the words out loud made everything real, made it impossible to deny what was happening between them. "I care about you too," she whispered. "I have been trying not to, trying to keep things professional, but I cannot help it. You make me feel things I have never felt before." Parker's hand moved from her hair to cup her cheek, his thumb stroking gently across her skin. "I want to court you properly if you will let me. I want to take you to dances and church socials and all the things respectable suitors do. But more than that, I want to be there for you, to stand beside you no matter what comes. Will you let me do that?" "Yes," Rebecca said, feeling tears prick her eyes. "Yes, I will." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of promise, and Rebecca felt like the whole world had shifted on its axis. Nothing else mattered in that moment, not Morton's lawyer or the threats to her ranch or anything else. All that mattered was the feeling of Parker's lips on hers, the warmth of his arms around her, the certainty that she had found something precious and rare. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling like fools. Parker rested his forehead against hers, his breath warm against her skin. "I have been wanting to do that since the moment I saw you standing in the doorway of that saloon, looking like an avenging angel." Rebecca laughed, giddy with happiness. "I have been wanting you to do it for almost as long." They stood there for a few more minutes, wrapped in each other's arms before reluctantly separating. Rebecca rode home with her heart singing, all her worries temporarily forgotten in the glow of new love. But reality came crashing back the next morning when the lawyer, a severe man named Harold Jessup, showed up at the ranch with a court summons. He handed it to Rebecca with a smug expression, clearly expecting her to crumble. "You have 2 weeks to appear before Judge Anderson in the territorial courthouse," Jessup said. "I suggest you get your affairs in order. When the judge sees the evidence we have compiled, he will have no choice but to return the property to its rightful owner." "Parker Hastings won that deed fairly," Rebecca said, her voice shaking with anger. "And I will prove it in court." "We shall see about that," Jessup said and rode away. Rebecca immediately sent word to Parker, and he arrived within the hour. They sat at her father's old desk and went through everything again, trying to prepare for every possible argument the lawyer might make. Parker had kept careful records of all his games over the years, documenting his wins and losses, and there was nothing in his past to suggest he was a cheat. But they both knew that sometimes the truth was not enough, especially when you were up against money and influence. The 2 weeks before the hearing passed in a blur of preparation and worry. Parker moved his things into the bunkhouse at the Ashford ranch so they could work together more easily, and Rebecca found comfort in his presence. Every evening after supper, they would sit on the porch and talk about the case, about the ranch, about their hopes for the future. And every evening, Parker would kiss her goodnight before heading down to the bunkhouse, leaving her with her heart full and her mind spinning. Her brothers watched this courtship with mixed emotions. Thomas seemed relieved that Rebecca had found someone good, someone who would help her carry the burden of running the ranch. William was more suspicious, still not entirely trusting Parker's motives. But both of them kept their opinions to themselves, knowing they had forfeited their right to question Rebecca's choices. The day of the hearing arrived hot and clear, the kind of day that made you grateful for any shade or breeze. Rebecca dressed in her best dress, a dark blue cotton with white lace at the collar, and tried to calm her racing heart. Parker wore his cleanest clothes and his best hat, and together they rode to the courthouse in Safford, the territorial seat about 30 miles from Clifton. Judge Anderson was an older man with white hair and a stern expression that gave nothing away. He listened patiently as Harold Jessup laid out Morton's case, presenting witnesses who claimed they had seen Parker marking cards or signaling to Confederates in the audience. Rebecca's blood boiled as she listened to these lies, but Parker squeezed her hand, silently urging her to stay calm. When it was their turn, Parker stood and addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, I have been playing cards for 15 years, and in all that time, I have never cheated a single person. I keep detailed records of every game I play, and I can account for every dollar I have won or lost. The witnesses Mr. Jessup has brought forward are lying, and I can prove it." He proceeded to dismantle each witness's testimony with calm, methodical precision. The man who claimed to have seen Parker marking cards had not even been in the saloon that night, as confirmed by the bartender. The woman who said she saw him signaling to a Confederate was Morton's mistress, a fact that Parker revealed with receipts from the hotel where she had been staying. One by one, the lies fell apart under scrutiny. Then it was Rebecca's turn to testify. She stood before the judge and described everything she had seen that night, the honesty in Parker's play, the arrogance in Morton's demeanor. She spoke about how her brothers had gambled away her inheritance, and how Parker had been the only person willing to help her get it back. She looked the judge in the eye and said, "Parker Hastings is the most honorable man I have ever met. He risked his own money to help a stranger, asking for nothing in return except a fair price for a portion of land. If that is not proof of good character, I do not know what is." When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Judge Anderson studied her for a long moment, then turned to Jessup. "Do you have any actual evidence that Mr. Hastings cheated in that card game? Not testimony from questionable witnesses, but real, tangible evidence?" Jessup sputtered, clearly not expecting to be challenged so directly. "Your Honor, the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. Circumstantial evidence is not enough to overturn a legal transaction," the judge said firmly. "Especially when the defense has provided such compelling testimony to the contrary. I find in favor of Miss Ashford and Mr. Hastings. The deed to the Ashford ranch will remain in Miss Ashford's possession, and all costs associated with this case will be paid by Mr. Morton. Case dismissed." Rebecca felt like she might faint with relief. Parker grabbed her hand and held it tight, his face breaking into a huge grin. They had won. They had really won. Outside the courthouse, they found a small crowd of townspeople from Clifton who had made the journey to support them. Henry and James were there, along with the bartender from the Silver Spur and a dozen other familiar faces. Everyone was cheering and clapping them on the back, celebrating their victory. On the ride home, as the sun began to set and paint the desert in shades of gold and red, Parker pulled his horse close to Rebecca's. "I have never been prouder of anyone in my life than I was of you today. The way you stood up there and told the truth, the way you defended me, it meant everything." Rebecca felt tears sliding down her cheeks, but they were happy tears now. "We defended each other. That is what partners do." "Is that what we are?" Parker asked, his voice soft and teasing. "Partners? I hope we are more than that," Rebecca said, meeting his eyes. "I hope we are building something that will last." Parker reined in both their horses and leaned across the space between them to kiss her, long and deep and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, he said, "Marry me, Rebecca. Let us build that future together as husband and wife." "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the little church in Clifton. Rebecca wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk for all these years, and Parker wore a new suit that made him look impossibly handsome. Her brothers gave her away, both of them crying as they walked her down the aisle. Henry and James stood up as witnesses, and half the town crowded into the pews to watch, when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, and Parker kissed her in front of everyone. Rebecca felt like her heart might burst with happiness. This was what she had been fighting for all along. Not just the land, but the chance to build a life with someone she loved, someone who saw her as an equal and a partner. They spent their wedding night in the ranch house, in the room that had been her father's and would now be theirs. Parker was gentle and patient, taking his time to show her all the ways love could be expressed, and Rebecca gave herself to him completely, holding nothing back. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the moonlight streaming through the window, talking about their dreams for the future. "I want to expand the herd," Rebecca said, trailing her fingers across his chest. "Maybe buy some of the new breeds from back east, improve our stock." "I want to build you a bigger house," Parker said, kissing her forehead. "Something with room for a family. How many children do you want?" Rebecca laughed. "Let us start with one and see how it goes, but I want several if we are blessed that way. I want this house to be full of noise and laughter, the way it was when my parents were young." "That sounds perfect," Parker murmured. "Everything with you is perfect." The next few years passed in a blur of hard work and deep happiness. Parker's house was completed in the fall of 1884, a sturdy 2-story structure with a wide porch and room to grow. But by then, Rebecca was pregnant with their first child, and they decided to live in the main ranch house instead, using Parker's house for the growing crew of ranch hands they were hiring. Their son was born in the spring of 1885, a healthy baby with Parker's dark hair and Rebecca's green eyes. They named him Samuel, after Rebecca's father, and from the moment he was born, he was the center of their universe. Parker proved to be a devoted father, spending every free moment with his son, teaching him about horses and cattle and the land. Thomas and William had both settled into their roles as ranch hands, working hard to repay their debt and rebuild their relationship with Rebecca. Thomas eventually married a widow from town, a kind woman with 2 children of her own, and William found work as a foreman on a neighboring ranch. They would never be as close as they once were, but they had found a way to be family again, and that was enough. The ranch prospered under Rebecca and Parker's joint management. They combined Rebecca's knowledge of the land and the cattle with Parker's head for business and numbers, creating an operation that was both efficient and profitable. By 1887, they had paid off all the debts left by her brothers and had started buying additional land from neighbors who wanted to sell. The Ashford Hastings Ranch, as it became known, was one of the most successful in the territory. Their daughter was born in 1888, a tiny thing with blonde curls and a temper to match. They named her Clara, and she wrapped both her parents around her little finger from day one. Samuel adored his baby sister, and the two of them were inseparable as they grew. On a warm evening in the summer of 1890, Rebecca and Parker sat on the porch of the ranch house, watching their children play in the yard. Samuel, now 5, was teaching 3-year-old Clara how to rope a fence post, both of them laughing when the rope went wild and missed completely. "Do you remember that night in the Silver Spur?" Rebecca asked, leaning against Parker's shoulder. "When I walked in and saw the deed on that table, I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever seen," Parker said, wrapping his arm around her. "I remember wanting to help you, even though I did not know why at the time. I just knew you were someone special, someone worth fighting for." "I thought you were crazy," Rebecca admitted with a laugh. "Some stranger offering to gamble for my ranch, asking only for land in return. It seemed too good to be true." "But it was true," Parker said, kissing the top of her head. "And look at what we built together. This ranch, this family, this life. It is everything I ever dreamed of and more." Rebecca turned to look at him, this man who had saved her home and won her heart, and she felt overwhelmed with gratitude and love. "I cannot imagine my life without you. You gave me back everything I had lost, and then you gave me so much more. You gave me a home," Parker said softly. "You gave me roots and purpose and a reason to stop drifting. You gave me love. That is worth more than all the land in Arizona." They kissed as the sun set behind them, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. In the yard, their children continued to play, their laughter ringing out across the land like music. The ranch house stood solid and strong, filled with warmth and light and the promise of many more years to come. Later that night, after the children were in bed, Rebecca and Parker made love with the slow, familiar passion of two people who knew each other's bodies and hearts completely. Afterward, they talked about expanding the house again, adding more rooms for the children they hoped to have. They talked about buying the property to the north, which had just come up for sale. They talked about their children's future, about the legacy they wanted to leave. As Rebecca drifted off to sleep in Parker's arms, she thought about her father and how proud he would be of what she had accomplished. She had not just saved his ranch. She had built it into something bigger and better than he had ever imagined. And she had done it with a partner who loved her and respected her, who saw her as an equal in every way. The years continued to roll by, bringing new challenges and new joys. In 1892, they had twin boys, William and Thomas, named after her brothers in a gesture of forgiveness and reconciliation. The twins were holy terrors from the start, getting into everything and keeping their parents constantly on their toes. But they also brought immense joy, and Samuel and Clara loved being big siblings. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By the turn of the century, they owned over 2,000 acres and employed more than 20 ranch hands. They had built a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing, and buyers came from all over the territory to purchase their stock. Parker had long since given up gambling, finding that real life provided more than enough excitement and reward. In 1905, Arizona was well on its way to becoming a state, and there was talk of Parker running for the territorial legislature. He declined, saying he had no interest in politics, and would rather spend his time on the ranch with his family. But he did serve on the local school board, working to improve education opportunities for children in the area. Their children grew up strong and capable. Samuel went to college in California, studying agriculture and business, then came home to work alongside his parents on the ranch. He married a schoolteacher from Tucson in 1906, and they gave Rebecca and Parker their first grandchild the following year. Clara proved to have her father's head for numbers and her mother's determination. She took over managing the ranch's finances when she was just 18, streamlining operations and finding new ways to increase profits. She never married, saying she was too busy running the ranch to bother with men, and both her parents respected her choice. The twins followed different paths. William became a veterinarian, studying at a university back east and then setting up a practice in Clifton. Thomas joined the Territorial Rangers, helping to keep order as Arizona transitioned toward statehood. Both made their parents proud in different ways. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1909, Parker surprised Rebecca with a trip to San Francisco. It was her first time leaving Arizona, and she was both excited and nervous about the journey. They stayed in a fancy hotel, ate at expensive restaurants, and walked along the waterfront holding hands like young lovers. But both of them were secretly glad to get back to the ranch, back to the land they had built together. "I miss the smell of the desert," Rebecca confessed as they rode up the familiar road to the ranch house. "I missed the sound of the cattle and the sight of the mountains. Is that silly?" "Not at all," Parker said, reaching over to take her hand. "This is our home. This is where we belong." They found the house in good order, Samuel and Clara having managed everything perfectly in their absence. That night, they sat on the porch as they had done countless times before, watching the stars come out one by one. "Do you ever regret it?" Rebecca asked quietly. "Giving up your wandering life to settle down here?" Parker looked at her with surprise and love. "Not for a single moment. You and this ranch, our children and grandchildren, this is everything I ever wanted. I was just too foolish to know it before I met you. You saved me, Rebecca, just as much as I helped you save this place." "We saved each other," Rebecca said, and it was the truth. As they grew older, they gradually handed over more responsibilities to their children, though neither of them ever really retired. Rebecca could still be found in the barn or the pastures most days, checking on the animals and supervising operations. Parker spent his mornings going over the books and his afternoons riding the property, making sure everything was running smoothly. In 1912, Arizona finally achieved statehood, and there was a huge celebration in Clifton. The whole family attended, 3 generations of Ashford Hastings, all of them proud to be part of this new chapter in their home's history. By 1915, Rebecca and Parker had 7 grandchildren, with more on the way. The ranch house had been expanded twice more to accommodate all the family gatherings, and it was rarely quiet. Sunday dinners were loud, chaotic affairs with children running everywhere and multiple conversations happening at once. Rebecca and Parker loved every minute of it. One afternoon in the spring of that year, Rebecca found Parker sitting on the porch with a thoughtful expression. She sat down beside him, taking his hand in hers. They were both in their 50s now, their hair streaked with gray, their faces lined with years of hard work and laughter. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Parker said simply. "I am thinking about that night in the Silver Spur 32 years ago when I saw you walk through that door. I am thinking about how that was the moment my real life began. Everything before that was just preparation, just waiting for you." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. After all these years, he could still make her heart flutter with just a few words. "I love you," she said. I have loved you since that first night, even though I did not know it then. You gave me back my home, but more than that, you gave me yourself. That was the greatest gift anyone has ever given me." Parker pulled her close, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower in the sky. Around them, the ranch hummed with life and activity. Cattle lowed in the distance, horses whinnied in the corrals, ranch hands called out to each other as they finished the day's work. Inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their laughter floating out through the open windows. This was what they had built together. Not just a successful ranch or a prosperous business, but a legacy of love and hard work, of partnership and respect. Every acre of land, every fence post and barn, every horse and cow, all of it represented years of working side by side, making decisions together, supporting each other through good times and bad. Rebecca thought about her father, about how he would have loved Parker, would have been proud of what they had accomplished. She thought about her brothers, who had found their own redemption through years of honest work. She thought about all the challenges they had faced and overcome, from Morton's lawsuit to droughts and harsh winters and market fluctuations. Through it all, she and Parker had stood together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. "You think the children will keep it going?" Parker asked. "After we are gone, do you think they will maintain what we built?" "I know they will," Rebecca said with certainty. "We raised them to love this land, to understand what it means to work for something, to build something that lasts. Samuel has your business sense, and Clara has my determination. The twins have their own strengths. They will make this place even better than we did." As the sun finally disappeared behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of red and gold, Parker stood and pulled Rebecca to her feet. They walked inside together, hand in hand, ready for supper with their family. The house was full of warmth and light and love, and Rebecca felt a deep sense of contentment settle over her. This was her happily ever after, she realized. Not a fairy tale ending with perfect circumstances, but a real, lived-in happiness built on years of hard work and deep love. She had lost her inheritance to her brother's foolishness, but in fighting to get it back, she had found something far more valuable. She had found a partner, a lover, a best friend. She had found the other half of her soul. And every acre of land they owned, every success they had achieved, was sweeter because they had done it together. The years that followed were peaceful and prosperous. The ranch continued to thrive under the joint management of the family, with each generation adding their own innovations and improvements. Rebecca and Parker became the beloved matriarch and patriarch, their wisdom sought on all major decisions, their stories told and retold at family gatherings. In the evenings, when the work was done and the house was quiet, they would still sit together on that porch, holding hands and watching the stars. Sometimes they talked about the past, reminiscing about all they had been through. Sometimes they talked about the present, discussing the ranch and the family. And sometimes they simply sat in silence, finding comfort in each other's presence, in the knowledge that they had built something beautiful and lasting. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1924, the whole family gathered for a celebration that lasted 3 days. There were speeches and toasts, laughter and tears. Samuel talked about how his parents had taught him the meaning of partnership and respect. Clara spoke about her mother's strength and her father's kindness. The twins shared stories about growing up on the ranch, about all the lessons they had learned from watching their parents work together. But the most moving moment came when Thomas and William, Rebecca's brothers, stood up to speak. They were old men now, their faces weathered by time and regret, but there was peace in their eyes. 44 years ago we made the worst mistake of our lives, Thomas said, his voice shaking with emotion. We threw away our sister's inheritance, her birthright, for the sake of our own foolish pride and addiction. We thought we had destroyed everything our father built, but Rebecca proved us wrong. She fought to get it back, and in the process, she built something even greater. She built a family legacy that will last for generations. And she did it with the help of the best man any of us have ever known. Parker, you saved more than just a ranch that night. You saved all of us. William nodded, tears streaming down his face. We spent years working to repay what we stole, but we know we can never truly make up for what we did. Rebecca, you gave us a second chance when we did not deserve one. You let us be part of this family, part of this legacy. That is a gift we can never repay. We love you, and we are so sorry for what we put you through. Rebecca stood and walked over to her brothers, embracing them both as they all cried together. Parker watched with tears in his own eyes, moved by this moment of reconciliation and healing. After all these years, the wounds had finally been closed, the family made whole again. As the celebration wound down and the guests began to leave, Rebecca and Parker found themselves alone on the porch once more. The ranch stretched out before them in the moonlight, peaceful and beautiful, a testament to everything they had built together. 40 years, Rebecca said wonderingly. It feels like yesterday and a lifetime all at once. The best 40 years of my life, Parker said, pulling her close. And I look forward to however many more we have together. They kissed under the stars, these two people who had found each other in the most unlikely circumstances, who had built an empire on courage and love and hard work. Their story had started with loss and desperation, but it had become something beautiful, something that would last long after they were gone. And on the land that had almost been lost, that they had fought so hard to reclaim, their legacy would continue for generations to come. The Ashford Hastings Ranch would stand as a monument to what two people could accomplish when they worked together, when they loved each other with everything they had, when they refused to give up no matter how impossible the odds seemed. Rebecca and Parker lived well into their 70s, spending their final years surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. They never stopped holding hands, never stopped sitting together on that porch in the evenings, never stopped being partners in every sense of the word. When Parker passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1932, Rebecca grieved deeply, but found comfort in knowing that they had lived a full and beautiful life together. She followed him just 6 months later, and they were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, with headstones that read simply, "Together they built something beautiful." The ranch remained in the family for generations, each successive generation adding their own chapter to the story. But they all knew that it had started with Rebecca and Parker, with a desperate woman who walked into a saloon demanding justice, and a wandering gambler who saw something worth fighting for. Their love story became family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest challenges. And every acre of that land, from the eastern section where Parker had built his first house to the western pastures where Rebecca's father had first staked his claim, carried their love forward into the future, a legacy that would never be forgotten, and a reminder that true partnership and deep love could overcome anything.